Right, good afternoon, everybody. I think it's time to start. And this session, we will be looking at Northern Ireland and asking whether or not there'll be a united Ireland in our lifetimes. Because that's different for all of us. But we'll see. I'm very pleased to welcome our speakers. Geoff Martin, who set up the European Commission office in Northern Ireland. And I was just discussing with him. I remember when he was running the European Commission office in London. Very pleased to see him. And Professor Jennifer Todd, who is Emeritus Professor at the School of Politics and International Relations at University College Dublin, and Research Director of the Institute of British-Irish Studies. That's correct. Geoff, would you like to start?
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think it's probably worth me reporting the fact that I was born in a linen village in South Armagh, where I lived until I was 18 years of age. And in addition to what the Chairman said about my time opening the European Commission office there and then running it, running the European Commission in the United Kingdom, I have been fortunate in maintaining contact with Northern Ireland right down the years in a number of capacities. And I was over there 2 weeks before last. So when I saw what the Chairman put down in the form of this question, a united Ireland in my lifetime, I would say with great respect, brethren, I don't think so. Who knows? But I don't really think so for a number of reasons which I will touch upon in the course of these few short remarks. But before doing so, may I say that the scene over there is currently still dominated by Brexit, by the border, by the protocol, by Irish unity, and by the possibility of a referendum on a border code. A few facts. It may surprise some of you that there are 97 peace walls still standing in Northern Ireland. 97. It is also the case, on a more positive note, and I was in Newry the other day, that Newry town as it was when I was there, Newry city it is now, but it has now become, is booming. And my interlocutors in there said to me, Geoff, the young people here are having a great time, not thinking about flags or symbols, but enjoying their prosperity because cross-border business and activity is going extremely well indeed. Add to that fact the recent consensus outcome, which recorded the fact that there are now 48% of Protestants in Northern Ireland and 52% Catholics, which has led some ill-informed observers in many parts of the world, including here, to believe that that means that a united Ireland is around the corner. Let me remind some of you that if you are a Catholic, you do not necessarily want to be in a united Ireland. And if you are a Protestant, you don't necessarily want to be in a United Kingdom which has left the European Union. As Austin Curry, my long-term friend, a former minister both in the Northern Ireland government and in the government of the South, used to say, he comes from County Tyrone, that he has more in common with a Protestant in Tyrone than he has with a Catholic in Cork. And therein lies the nugget of the reasons why I believe that to claim there will be a United Ireland tomorrow morning is to oversimplify a very complicated question. Another point worth mentioning is that I talked to one of my colleagues, a former chairman of the Unionist Party when I was over there, and asked him why on earth they were still behaving as quasi-DUP supporters. And he says, Geoff, don't let me forget to remind you that the Ulster Unionist Party still contains many members whose thought processes have not left the 17th century. Which is true if you think in 1690 terms. It remains the case in 2022. Another factor coming across to London is the fact that the stalemate which has been developing and now exists and has been dug deep into the earth principally by the DUP, the protocol is principally owned by the European Research Group, who effectively control the Democratic Unionist Party. Unless we can get rid of the purist sovereignty approach, which is being taken by the ERG and by the senior ministers from England over there, there is little likelihood of any change being around the corner. Let me bring you up to date in terms of public opinion. At the last public opinion which I read about, covered by a company called Lucid in the north, Sinn Féin was polling 26%, the DUP was polling 20%, the Ulster Unionist Party was polling 14%, the Alliance Party was polling 14%, the SDLP, John Hume's old party, was polling 10%, and the TUV, headed by Jim Allister, formerly Ian Paisley's right hand, was polling 9%. What are the issues? The issues are twofold in the main. Number one, the non-functioning executive. Number two, the protocol. And when I say that, you will have read the newspapers yesterday and today. It looks as if we're going to have a general election on the 15th of December. I'm bound to say, however, that my informants tell me that a general election of the executive is unlikely to conclude with any particular change, and therefore a lot of money might be expended and a huge amount of energy expended as well in an exercise which is likely to deliver nothing on the ground. Turning to the south, and by the way, I should finish the north by saying the reason the executive is not functioning properly is because the DUP have decided not to go into power sharing arrangements with Sinn Féin for a large number of reasons, even though all of the other parties are prepared to do that. Going south, because you can't talk about federalism in Northern Ireland unless you talk about the south as well. Moving south, we have got a concept introduced last year by the coalition government of a shared island. The idea being that a single united Catholic-led Sinn Féin would run the place itself is obviously not likely to take place, and therefore Geoff Martin and Varadkar have come up there with the idea of a shared island, by which they mean a comprehensive set of policies wherein the southern part of Ireland and northern part of Ireland can share each other's assets, shoulder each other's responsibilities, and in some shape or form yet to be determined, run the island on a shared basis in the future. No fundamental constitutional arguments have been advanced yet, because it's too early, as to what happens to the present of the British monarchy, what happens to those unionists who are die-hard British supporters, amongst other things. and I've lost my place. What, therefore, are the problems? The problems are unity, which we've talked about in passing. Unity is taken to mean a vote in which Northern Irish people will vote 50+1%, and that will create an Irish unity. Absolutely not. Nobody in the north or in the south are going to accept an Irish unity formula with 50+1% of the votes. Secondly, the principle of consent, which is relatively new. The principle of consent is a very important instrument. It means that no one, not the Southern government, not the British government, no one except the people of Northern Ireland can decide for themselves what their future is likely to be. And that is fundamental, and again leads to all kinds of possible scenarios as we move towards, hopefully, the resolution of the protocol, which of course, as you know, came about because a second border was introduced into Ireland following Brexit, which agreed that no land border would exist, but that because the European Union and Ireland was part and parcel of the single market, then the European Union single market would become an international trade barrier outside which the United Kingdom would then exist. That is why the so-called border of the North Sea was created. I believe that this border has been subject of negotiations of a detailed kind, and that a possible set of formulae have been on the table in Brussels, in Dublin, in London, and in Belfast since February, but the powers that be in the British government have not had the opportunity or have not taken the political will to resolve it, in which case we can make some progress. So therefore, at the moment, the protocol is stuck. The election is taking place, and the future is an unknown quantity for the time being. My last point, Chairman, is a very simple one. I sense some political movement in the Republic. I sense political movement within Sinn Féin, which will be much more amenable towards dealing with Northern Protestants. I feel flexibility in Fine Gael, yes, because the Deputy Chief of Varadkar made a very important speech about a fortnight ago, during which he committed himself and his party to trying to negotiate an arrangement with the North, which would recognise for the first time the existence and maintenance of a British identity on Northern Irish soil. If these things come to pass and are properly negotiated, then I think there is a prospect that things can move ahead in a positive way. I do not believe, therefore, that we can see a united Ireland in the traditional sense of the term, but I do think that in the future we can see an Ireland which is different to the current arrangement of a republic and a province. I can see a federal solution in Ireland, and as not yet negotiated, a possible confederal situation between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. That would be new, and I will welcome that, as I'm sure many of the people in this room would also do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's very interesting and very informative, and having a view from inside what's going on, as opposed to what we might hear on the BBC sometimes. So Todd, would you like to take over?
Thank you, and thank you, Geoff. I should say that I'm from South County Derby, which is quite far from Derby, but not that far.
To Northern.
Yeah. I should also say that I agree with about 80%, maybe even 85%, maybe even 90% of what you say. And I don't know if we'll come to the 10% or not. I started by trying to answer the question, United Ireland in our lifetime, which I generously am saying said 30 years. And the answer, of course, depends on what a majority of voters in A, Northern Ireland, and B, the Republic of Ireland, decide how they choose. According to the Friday Agreement, 50% plus one is enough to make the decision. In Northern Ireland, everyone agrees, totally agrees this would not be ideal. One needs a bigger majority, but the agreement, the international agreement, is the 50% plus one. People are aiming for more. Again, this, in the census, there's already more what could be called cultural Catholics in Northern Ireland than cultural Protestants, not necessarily religious. And given the age profile, the majority of cultural Catholics seems set to increase. But there's also a steady move in each jurisdiction, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, away from a knee-jerk nationalism or unionism. There's increasing numbers of constitutional agnostics. And on my counting, depends how you define them, but in my counting, up to half, indeed over half of the population in Northern Ireland, and probably about the same in the South. They may vote Sinn Féin or Fine Gael, or even sometimes UUP or even DUP. But how they decide in a referendum in Irish unity will depend on what sort of Irish unity is on offer. And at present survey data say that a referendum probably wouldn't pass in the North and probably would pass quite easily in the South. What happens in 5, 10, 15 years' time depends on how these constitutionally floating voters, how they assess the United Ireland and offer. Now, in some of my recent research with Joanne McAvoy in Aberdeen, I've been talking with these constitutional agnostics, moderate swayers, women, young people, disadvantaged youth in both parts of Ireland, interviews, focus groups, deliberative cafes. And when you ask them, again, it's a large percentage of people, what do they prioritise? A, first of all, they're interested in constitutional affairs. B, they prioritise what they call bread and butter issues. They prioritise experience, not ideology. And they prioritise what I call quality of democracy, but what they call good, viable government. And to list some of the things, the economic impact of the United Ireland, the impact and quality of life in general, on reproductive rights, human rights, is quality of democracy, is going to be a good society, a decent, viable politics for everybody, a government that functions well? Is it going, in the words of one interviewee, to bring down the walls of sectarianism and also of class? Is it going to improve the systemic problems, for example, of healthcare in both parts of the island, in particular in the border? And how far is it going to maximise for both parts of the island the benefits of EU membership? Now, how this half of the population in both parts of the island vote depends very much on developments both in the United Kingdom and in the Republic of Ireland. If it looks like a United Ireland, incredibly thin, a good functioning rights-based government, better than the present in the Union, then these people will vote for it. If the UK credibly offers better governance, then in the North, people will vote for the UK. And if both UK and the Republic of Ireland offer good governance, functioning rights-based governance, then they have a real choice. And clearly that's the best scenario. It's also one that most likely holds out prospects of good British-Irish cooperation in whatever outcome. If neither the UK nor the Republic of Ireland offer good government, then the public has to see what it can live with. And that probably means a sectarian headcount, which isn't a good outcome. Now, I and many colleagues are presently looking at what a united Ireland, a good united Ireland might look like. But here today I want to ask the other question. What would count as a good functioning government in the UK for Northern Ireland? What sort of union would work for Northern Ireland? So let me very briefly, and I'm sure contentiously in this context, give a few thoughts on the union, on unions. And I take unions as a general category, even wider than federalism or confederalism. And I have argued elsewhere that unions are basically good things, but they fall to a basic dilemma. They have to be participative, voluntary, somebody said earlier today. The separate peoples of the union have to have a say in how they're done. And that's the virtue of being a union. But unions can't simply give in to the strongest voices, for then they'll constantly be pulled in different directions. And if this happens, the centre or largest party asserts its authority. But the more it does this, the less the polity behaves like a union. So I'm suggesting unions flip-flop between making everything negotiable and voluntary, and then being, and on the other hand, centralist authoritarianism. How do unions work? When they're voluntary, not authoritarian, but also principled, not in giving in to the loudest voices and demands. Also provisions and the following appropriate principles of governance, the provisions and procedures to change those principles of governance in new circumstances, and within this permitting asymmetries. And as I see it, that moves perhaps a little bit of the way towards federalism, but I wonder if federalism has a certain lack of negotiability and flexibility in its overarching principles. What I do want to say, though, is the Good Friday Agreement of 1998 exemplifies both the good and the bad of unions. The Good Friday Agreement is sort of the model charter for the union of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And with Tony Blair and Bertie Ahern, it was overly negotiable. The government changed its stance, for example, on policing practically every other day, depending how Sinn Féin or the Unionists pushed the affair. In contrast, a little later, with the Conservatives, Cameron, May, Johnson, the Union of Northern Ireland and Great Britain became authoritarian. Johnson once complained of Northern Ireland and the Union that one can't let the tail wag the dog. Now, in my concept of a union, that isn't a unionist sentiment. I hadn't heard it actually since I heard Merlin Rees say it in the early 1970s. And the Good Friday Agreement flip-flopped between bargaining and authoritarianism. It could have been more than this. Some people treated it as more than that. But to make it as more than that in practice, there had to be increasingly more explicit and more judiciable statements of the principles involved. Neither government did this, and thus the Good Friday Agreement didn't bed in to people's understanding. What would work for Northern Ireland? What sort of union, if any, would work? What would count as good government? Well, Good Friday Agreement was reasonably good. And you can see that by the fact that the majority of nationalist voters came to prefer it evolved Northern Ireland within the UK to a united Ireland up until quite recently, up until Brexit. I won't go into Good Friday Agreement in too much detail, but I will say that among the Irish government negotiators for the Good Friday Agreement, the expectation was that this was enough for nationalists. Northern Ireland would stay in the United Kingdom until sovereignty didn't matter anymore. Nationalists would come to accept it, not maybe love it, but they could wait. Those Irish negotiators were gone. It wasn't enough, and partly it wasn't enough because the Good Friday Agreement wasn't treated by the governments like a constitutional project that was to frame the future. It rather became an object of contention. As we've heard this morning, the last 10 years of Conservative governments and Brexit certainly exemplified bad governance of Northern Ireland. The upshot of Brexit, among other things, the upshot of the mode of government that Andrew Glick talked about is erosion of rights, majoritarianism, lack of respect for minorities, excessive power resources to small, well-organised groups within the Conservative Party, and the upshot, Northern Ireland became illegible to the British state. It was very problematic for Northern Ireland working with the Good Friday Agreement, lack of cooperation between British and Irish governments, difficulty of making Good Friday work after Brexit, and a willingness to contemplate unilateral action by the British government. Okay, can trust be refound? Is there a way back within the Union? Can we go back to what it was before? Let me tell you a story. I'm told that in the 1990s, Republicans told Irish negotiators that the Irish negotiators were being fooled by the British. The Brits will eat you for breakfast, they were told. Now, the Republicans actually changed their minds. As we know, they signed up to this. But today, after the last 5 years, it might be hard to find even the most moderate nationalist or constitutional agnostic in Northern Ireland who would be ready to believe British promises and commitments. But in a sense, it seems to me that doesn't matter. If a good form of union can be articulated and developed, it gives all the people in Northern Ireland a real choice. Moreover, the sort of open union that's necessary for Northern Ireland to be well governed also allows for the substantive cooperation between Britain and Ireland, even if people choose the United Ireland, not the United Kingdom. Now, what would this all look like? Does, if I read Andrew Glick's paper, does what he proposes fulfill the task? UK rejoining the EU would really ease relations a lot. Yes. Proportional representation. I was somewhat convinced by Andrew Glick's arguments, maybe enough in a British context, to favour consensual democracy. But coming from living in the Republic of Ireland, proportional representation certainly isn't enough to challenge majoritarianism and what I call groupism, the national we, which is such a phenomenon in the Republic of Ireland. It actually took the introduction of deliberative forums to get minority issues onto the agenda in the South and to begin to change viewpoints. And it would seem to me that in a possible united Ireland, we'd need both PR and deliberative committee publics and more participative forms of deliberation to introduce new issues onto the agenda and help incentivise different alliances on different issues. And is that also necessary in the UK? I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure it is in Northern Ireland. A written constitution, a federal constitution. Well, as I noted earlier, unions have to work on shared principles and shared projects if they're not to flip-flop between voluntarism, authoritarianism. In that sense, yes, written codified principles are necessary. But especially for Northern Ireland, there also have to be procedures by which principles can be changed and by which relations can be reconfigured at the limit of opting out of British sovereignty. The Good Friday Agreement was one step towards such an iterative constitution, and I'm not totally convinced that conventional forms of federalism don't allow that, but I'm open to unconventional forms. I think also a post-union scenario needs a lot of thought from the British government, because in a united Ireland, as you're saying, there'll undoubtedly be problems in accommodating sections of a British identifying unionist voting public. And at least some of those problems can only be overcome by interdependence. And on the British side, by leaving access, recognition, passports, etc., open to British identifiers. How that's to be done is another day's work, a long day's work.
Thank you very much. I found both these talks extremely enlightening, and I'm reminded of, you probably know in that book 1066 and all that, it just says the Irish keep changing the question, which is why the British can't find the answer. I don't think that's it. I think the truth is the British don't listen. Actually, the British haven't understood the question properly, but you've helped us to understand them better. Now, who would like to join in? Andrew.
Thanks to both panelists, we enjoyed that. There was mention of the ERG DUP axis, if you want to call it that. I wonder, could either of you give me an idea, what exactly was Steve Baker up to with this strange apology, non-apology? Is it just him having some kind of episode, or is there something more going on here? Let's put it this way, I didn't take it at face value. I think you might gather that, but I wonder your take. Was there any take of it on the other side of the Irish Sea or in the public about what was going on here?
Do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, well, I have no considered answer to that. My thought is either he, as the newly appointed Minister of State, went down to Dublin and he had insulted the Irish government over here on many occasions. He wanted to apologize for himself. There's one scenario, one explanation. Another explanation is that he wanted to quietly begin a process of gradual change. But on that point, I don't know what to believe myself. I sense, because I listened to Prime Minister Truss answering a ERG question the other week from the guy sitting beside Bill Cash, my old friend, and he was adopting a totally hardline attitude. Whether the current Prime Minister eases back on that, I don't know. Sorry about that.
On the ERG, I mean, I'm struck by the fact that this is some years ago. The majority of Brexit voters, I think it was in England, would prefer to get Brexit done than to keep the union. Now, I think the ERG still have a lot of that in them, and I think the DUP are busy being eaten for breakfast Friday.
Over here.
With the recent shambolic nature of governance in Great Britain and the shenanigans that often go on in Northern Ireland between the Republic and Ulster, and irrespective of which voting system used, preferential, proportional, or whatever, is democracy not just for the ordinary person the opportunity only of making a vote every 4 or 5 years?
So repeat the last part of it.
Is democracy anything more than simply having a vote every 4 or 5 years, particularly with reference to what Andrew just mentioned, the ERG and some of these other groups that are operating behind politics?
Okay, in the Irish Republic, I'm not going to call it Ireland because I think of Ireland as the island, but in the Irish state, there's sort of a turned upside down version of what Andrew described in the British state. It's highly democratic. There's a lot of democratic values. There's very little accountability. There's a high respect for law, but that law tends to be interpreted in quite a conservative way. So accountability is lacking. So democracy in the South is strong. In the North, everybody wants to discuss things. I mean, it's a little bit like Israel Palestine. When you go there, everybody's talking and very intense and wants to talk things out. Still in South Derry. So I don't think in either part of Ireland people just see democracy as something every 4 years. Certainly they're fed up with politicians in the north, but they're not fed up with politics.
I'll answer that by saying the absence of a power-sharing executive has denied people in Northern Ireland any realistic say on anything. Until that is fixed, people have a right to complain. Secondly, the DUP and others in the Northern Ireland Assembly used to criticise the European Union policies, and indeed particularly the policies vis-a-vis the protocol, because they said Northern Ireland has no democratic input. The reason that Northern Ireland had and has no democratic input is because the DUP refused to attend the North-South ministerial meeting, which is part and parcel of the Good Friday Agreement. If they did, then there would be a good, useful, constructive democratic deficit closed, and opened up would be possibilities to discuss whatever they want to discuss vis-a-vis the protocol with their colleagues in Dublin, and therefore with colleagues in Brussels too, for that reason.
Just looking at the title of the conference, Federal Future for the UK, and asked a really stunning, stupid question. But the conversation that we've had thus far would suggest to me that if there is any discussion of a federal future in Ireland, it's between the north of Ireland and the rest. We haven't heard anything about the discussion of a federal UK in that sense, and the role that Northern Ireland might, in the event of there being such a thing, play in such an arrangement. So my reading of that, again, is that actually, in terms of the federal future of the UK, there isn't going to be a UK start. The Northern Ireland section is going to go its own way with the rest of Ireland in some form or another, but it won't necessarily be looking for solutions.
We don't know yet, because the future of Northern Ireland has not yet been determined or decided upon. It's true that a United Kingdom federation or confederation, even as I put it in my remarks, has not been given serious thought. But if you set your mind to it, you will realize that irrespective of what focus Northern Ireland has vis-a-vis the Republic and vice versa, there will, in my personal view, be an essential role to be played by Northern Ireland, stroke the Republic, in a new form with the United Kingdom, and that is where confederalism might conceivably arise. But it's virgin territory, and nobody has stood on that piece of ground for the time being.
Irrespective of the European Union.
Irrespective of the European Union, we're dealing with a unique situation requiring unique and exceptional treatment, in my opinion.
And there's also the Celtic, the potential Celtic confederation, if indeed Scotland becomes independent and Wales and so on. So the prospects of interdependence across many levels are high.
One thing I want to say in my remarks, don't forget the fact that in the last couple of years, the Republic of Ireland has opened up consulates in Wales, in Scotland, and in northwest England. Of course, admittedly for good business reasons, especially in view of the fact that Wales has lost a lot of traffic because the land bridge has ceased to exist, but also because the Republic of Ireland business people see commercial advantage in this matter, which the government also recognizes. And if you put that together with what the professor said and look at the future, you can see a situation in which England becomes a rather exceptional force within the current United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland. So what I'm trying to suggest in my inarticulate way is that as we look ahead, new forms of governance are being discussed which have never been contemplated before. And the island of Ireland is in many respects leading the way in this regard.
And I wonder if within Northern Ireland, in both communities, since Brexit, has dual citizenship been taken up, significantly? Because certainly in the UK, people are desperately trying to invent, Irish grandmothers to get an Irish passport. And I particularly wonder whether any, Protestants or people of Protestant heritage or whatever.
Yeah, but I don't have the numbers at hand, but there's been a lot, including some of the Paisleys.
Yes, well, I know a large number because it's extremely convenient to have an Irish passport when you're traveling these days. My daughter, who has an Irish passport, was in Barcelona a few weeks ago, and she said it took her 3 minutes to come through the passport challenge in Barcelona, when her English friends took 2 hours.
Is it green in colour? What colour is it?
No,
No.
it's a EU passport.
Okay.
The day after the Brexit referendum, I was having a drink outside a pub at King's Cross, and the whole group of people there all discussing whether or not they could become Irish, whether their grandparents were. And eventually some woman said, well, I could marry that Dutchman. And I thought, all these people don't want to be British anymore. But anyway, Brendan, you were.
Well, I just personal anecdote, for a long time I believed that my mother's father, therefore my grandfather, had been born in Ireland and therefore I was entitled to an Irish passport. It turns out he was conceived in Ireland, but was born in London, and I missed out on. Two slightly more serious ones. One, you have to differentiate between the ERG and supporters of the Conservative Party, or even members of the Conservative Party. It's true that there was this celebrated opinion poll suggesting that both Conservative voters and even Conservative members were attaching more importance to getting Brexit done than preserving the Union with Northern Ireland. But that's not the view of the ERG. And the ERG is a very specific parliamentary junior group, and it's an open question, it seems to me, how far Sunak will be dependent on them and responsive to them. There was under Baker and Ethan Harris, and in the Truss period, something of a thaw. It wasn't just what Baker said. There were other things symbolically articulated that might have led to a more pragmatic approach to the protocol. But we'll have to see how that's going to work out. I wouldn't care to bet one way or the other. But the other point I want to make is very much to agree with Andrew. I don't see that Northern Ireland can ever be part of a federal UK because when people talk about the nations of the UK, you talk about England, you talk about Wales, you talk about Scotland. Is there a nation of Northern Ireland?
No.
Well, not merely is there not a nation of Northern Ireland, there are substantial bodies of opinion who would disavow any idea that they are part of the same nation as the other people who live in Northern Ireland. Even worse, from this point of view, there's a lot of people in Northern Ireland who believe that they are part of a nation, but it just doesn't have anything to do, in their view, with Northern Ireland. And this is more controversial, perhaps a harsher way of putting it, is that Northern Ireland can never be a stable state. It's always tending in one direction or the other. And Geoff is very interesting that the end point of Northern Ireland may not be Irish unification in any traditional sense.
Yeah.
But there is, it seems to me, something very deeply built into Northern Ireland, which makes it an unstable combination. it has to be a transition to something else. And remember, just to finish, that there was going to be this redrawing of the border in 3 years' time. Originally, it's supposed to be a temporary. Well, perhaps that's another example of the way in which you can always predict the future, but you never know when it's going to happen. Perhaps there will be a kind of unification, just under different circumstances from what we anticipate.
Well, thank you, Brendan. As I said on purpose, this chapter has not been closed yet. It's an open book. It's unique, and I cannot see, nor can anybody in the room, I don't think, see a satisfactory outcome. It's an open book. At the same time, I do believe that Northern Ireland will not stay the same as it currently is and has been. What the future is, however, is an open question.
But
Sorry, Karen.
Okay, it's actually hard when you start to make the argument about mechanisms a bit more, to say what it is about Northern Ireland that's inherently unstable, any more inherently unstable than other places, at least some other places. And you could argue that in benign circumstances, in benign post-sovereignist circumstances, as in the 1990s and beginning of the 2000s, there was a relative stability always overseen by the two governments, Irish and British governments. And that's what people thought, maybe could last for a good while. And it didn't, partially because the post-sovereigntist moment passed.
but yes, perhaps one should just think about very practical matters. The energy crisis. I believe, I'm right in saying this, correct me if I'm wrong, but the electricity supply situation in Ireland is actually done on an island-wide basis. Northern Ireland is now entirely dependent on electricity generated elsewhere. There may be some generation capacity in Northern Ireland itself, I don't know. Therefore, the decisions being made in London about energy prices and all the rest of it do not apply in Northern Ireland. And the solution for that is going to rest with the all-Ireland generation authority and how it's all going to be regulated. So when we talk about the fact that there's all this thing we don't quite know how to find the rest of it, events, my dear boy, events are marching ahead anyway. The openings that were set up with the Good Friday Agreement, the initiatives that were being put into place, have gone ahead, irrespective in a sense as to what people think about it. I don't know if anyone's polled the Northern Ireland Protestants at the moment, whether they like consuming electricity from the south. I don't know, but I think on the whole they appreciate the arrangement, I suspect. So there are things happening here which perhaps at some political level, which are again, I think, pushing for a all-Ireland solution in a way that, as far as the British end is concerned, we're not in the picture.
It could be said, I agree with that. And of course, if you look at the Good Friday Agreement, there are quite a large number of areas, in addition to energy, which you mentioned, which are common to both parts of the island of Ireland. And I would argue that to some extent, the political classes in Northern Ireland are out of sync with their own people. There's a gap of from the grassroots. For example, going back to Newry again, those young people who are not worried about flags and emblems, but worried about their prosperity. What was I going to say? I forgot what I was going to say. It's not. I forgot. What was I going to say? It's past.
Can I comment on what you?
Yes.
Just, the narrative that I've been listening to for a few years now is that the big changes are that, first of all, the Republic has changed from what it was 30 years ago. It's a different proposition altogether.
Yep.
And the second one, and you mentioned this earlier, one of you did, that younger people in Northern Ireland are less concerned about the rivalry between the two communities.
Right.
Now, I wanted to ask you, are these things I've been hearing, are they true? And do they not favour the opportunity for some kind of unification?
Well, first of all, the things are true, but the professor and I would agree is a very patchy thing. Newry, where I mentioned, the flags are irrelevant because prosperity is important. On the Shankill Road, however, the things are entirely and completely different from that point of view. But when it comes to unity, although 57% of the people of Northern Ireland voted to stay in the European Union, and a large number or quite a significant number of Protestants would vote if the deal was right to join a Republic of Ireland in the European Union. A bold statement about do you want a united Ireland, as the professor said, poses a number of questions, one of which is, what do you mean by a united Ireland? Leo Varadkar began to answer that question by saying that he recognized that the British identity was extremely important, and therefore people should have the opportunity of expressing themselves in a British context in his idea of a shared island. So the reason why both the main parties in the south of Ireland, forget about the north for the moment, do not want to have a referendum on a border poll is because they know that it hasn't been, the nature of an united Ireland hasn't been discussed down there yet, and therefore, what are they voting on? Just like Brexit, voting into a space about which they know nothing. So it's too dangerous and too soon.
Okay, if I can, first of all, what there is multi-level governance. But I'd argue, despite the electricity issue, the weight of multi-level governance in Northern Ireland still weighs on east-west, not north-south lines. But there is increasing multi-level governance. Youth all say we're not concerned with flags, but you have to also see that there was a remobilisation of Belfast youth in 2012, 2013 in the flags protests. And maybe, well, and what is a united Ireland? What is a united Ireland is a particularly important question, not just in the north, but very much in the south, which is a relatively stable society and relatively functional. And people very much don't, they want peace and stability on the island and they vote for that, but they don't want to disrupt relative success to make things, a basket case. So what the United Ireland is really quite a central question on the island as a whole.
Thanks very much. I'm afraid I think we've come to the end of our time for this session because I found it absolutely fascinating. I would be happy to go on for another half hour, but we probably will need our coffee. Would you join me, please, in thanking our speakers? When should we be back?
At 3 o'clock.
3 o'clock.